Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her scope as the Afghan wind whipped across the rocky outcrop. 3 months into her deployment with the elite reconnaissance unit, she had earned respect through precision shots that saved countless lives. But today felt different. The intelligence reports seemed too clean, too perfect. Her spotter, Corporal Jake Reynolds, lay beside her, scanning the valley below through his binoculars. They had been tracking a high-value target for weeks, and finally received word that Hassan Malik, a notorious Taliban commander, would be meeting with his lieutenants in the abandoned village of Khost Matun. The mission briefing had been straightforward. Maria would provide overwatch, while a 12-man SEAL team moved in to capture Malik alive. Intelligence suggested minimal resistance, maybe 6 or 7 fighters at most. The SEALs had trained for this exact scenario dozens of times. Maria checked her Barrett M82 rifle one final time. The .50 caliber weapon had never failed her, and at 800 meters, she could put a round through a quarter. But something in her gut told her this operation would test every skill she had learned in her 8 years of military service. The SEALs began their approach at dawn, moving like shadows through the rocky terrain. Team leader, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb, had specifically requested Maria for this mission after she had saved his unit during an ambush 2 months earlier. Her single shot had eliminated a machine gunner who had them pinned down for hours. Through her scope, Maria watched the village come alive with activity. But instead of the expected handful of fighters, she counted movement in at least 15 different buildings. Armed men moved between structures in a pattern that suggested military training, not the random positioning of local militia. She keyed her radio. Overwatch to strike team. I count significant movement in the target zone. More personnel than expected. Webb's voice crackled back through her earpiece. Copy that. Overwatch. We see it too. Adjusting approach route. Webb's. Adjusting approach route. But as the SEALs moved closer, Maria noticed something that made her blood run cold. The fighters weren't just randomly positioned. They were setting up fields of fire that would create a perfect killing zone. Every angle of approach was covered by overlapping machine gun positions. The abandoned village was bait, and her fellow soldiers were walking straight into the trap. She watched through her scope as 2 fighters hauled a heavy machine gun to a second-floor window. The weapon would have a clear view of the main route the SEALs were taking. Maria calculated distance, wind speed, and trajectory in seconds that felt like hours. Her first shot shattered the morning silence. The machine gunner dropped, his weapon clattering to the floor below. But instead of the confusion she expected, the response was immediate and coordinated. Every fighting position in the village opened fire simultaneously. The SEALs found themselves caught in a crossfire that should have been impossible with the intelligence they had received. Muzzle flashes erupted from windows, rooftops, and hidden positions behind walls. The crack of AK-47 seconds mixed with the deeper boom of RPGs. Taking heavy fire, Webb shouted over the radio. Multiple casualties. Request immediate support. Maria was already moving, adjusting her position to engage targets that threatened her trapped teammates. Through her scope, she could see the SEALs pressed against whatever cover they could find. But the enemy had planned for this. Every piece of concealment had corresponding angles of attack. She took her second shot, eliminating a sniper who had been drawing a bead on the SEAL medic. Her third dropped an RPG gunner, just as he prepared to fire at the team's position. But for every target she eliminated, 2 more seemed to take their place. The radio chattered with urgent calls for support, casualty reports, and ammunition counts. Maria realized that standard protocols wouldn't work here. The enemy had superior numbers, better positioning, and had clearly planned this ambush for weeks or months. Corporal Reynolds was calling in air support, but the nearest helicopter was 40 minutes away. Artillery was even further out. The SEALs needed help now, and Maria was the only friendly asset in position to provide it. She made a decision that would either save her teammates or get them all killed. Instead of maintaining her overwatch position, she was going to move closer to the fight. Strike team. This is Overwatch. I'm repositioning to provide close support. Mark your positions and hold tight. Webb's response was immediate. Negative. Overwatch. Too dangerous. Maintain your position. But Maria was already packing her rifle. Reynolds stared at her in disbelief. Santos, you can't go down there alone. It's suicide. Maria shouldered her rifle and checked her sidearm. They're going to die if someone doesn't change the game. Keep calling for support and watch my back. She began moving down the mountainside, using every piece of cover available. Her plan was simple, but desperate. If she could reach an abandoned compound about 300 meters from the main village, she would have multiple angles of fire and could force the enemy to divide their attention. The descent took precious minutes, while her teammates remained pinned down. Every second that passed meant more ammunition expended, more blood lost, and less chance of survival for the entire team. As she reached her new position, Maria could hear the intensity of the firefight increasing, moving to flank the SEALs from multiple directions. She had perhaps minutes before the situation became completely hopeless. Setting up her rifle in a window that gave her a clear view of 3 different enemy positions, Maria began the most important shooting of her career. Her 4th shot of the day eliminated a fighter who was about to throw a grenade into the SEAL position. Her 5th silenced a machine gun that had been raking their cover with sustained fire. But now she had revealed her new position, and enemy fire began concentrating on her building. Bullets splintered the walls around her as she moved from window to window, engaging targets and then relocating before return fire could find her. The SEALs began to gain breathing room as Maria drew fire away from their position. But she was now outnumbered by at least 30 to 1, trapped in a building that was rapidly becoming a target for every enemy weapon in the village. Her radio crackled with Webb's voice. Overwatch, you've got multiple fighters moving on your position. Get out of there. Through her scope, Maria could see armed men running toward her building from 3 different directions. She had maybe 2 minutes before they reached her, and there was nowhere left to run. She keyed her radio one last time. Strike team, use the distraction. Move to secondary rally point. I'll hold them as long as possible. The response came back filled with static and determination. Negative. Overwatch. We don't leave anyone behind. Hold tight. We're coming for you. Maria smiled grimly as she chambered another round. The SEALs were about to attempt a rescue that would either save them all or ensure they died together. Either way, she wasn't going to make it easy for the enemy. The first fighter appeared at the base of her building, and Maria sent him sprawling with a shot that echoed across the valley. But behind him came more, and she could hear Boots on the stairs below. The real fight was just beginning. Maria could hear Boots pounding up the concrete stairs as she repositioned to the back window of her makeshift fighting position. 3 fighters were climbing the exterior wall, while at least 2 more approached from the stairwell. The building that had given her tactical advantage was now becoming her tomb. She fired through the floor, her .50 caliber round, punching through concrete to catch one of the climbers. His scream echoed off the surrounding buildings as he fell, but his companions kept coming. These weren't local militia fighters. Their movements showed professional military training, and their coordination suggested months of preparation. The first enemy fighter reached the top of the stairs, his AK-47 sweeping the room. Maria was already moving, having anticipated his angle of approach. Her sidearm barked once, dropping him before he could acquire a target. But the second man was right behind him, and more were climbing through the windows. She dove behind a concrete partition as automatic fire shredded the air where she had been standing. Chunks of masonry exploded around her, filling the air with choking dust. These fighters knew how to clear a building, and they had her trapped with nowhere to retreat. But Maria had not survived 8 years in special operations by giving up when the odds turned bad. She pulled a fragmentation grenade from her vest, counted to 3, and lobbed it toward the stairwell. The explosion rocked the building and bought her precious seconds to reposition. Through the smoke and debris, she could hear voices shouting in Pashto. They were coordinating their assault, planning to overwhelm her from multiple directions simultaneously. She had maybe 30 seconds before they rushed her position. Her radio crackled with Webb's voice. Overwatch, sitrep. We heard the explosion. Multiple hostiles in the building. Maria responded, chambering around in her rifle. They're going to rush me in 10 seconds. Whatever you're planning, do it fast. What she couldn't see was the desperate plan Webb had formulated. The SEAL commander had realized that conventional tactics would get them all killed. Instead, he was splitting his remaining 8 effective fighters into 2 teams. 4 would create a diversion by attacking the main enemy position, while he led the other 4 in a direct assault on Maria's building. The plan was tactically insane. They would be abandoning their defensive position to attack a superior force across open ground. But Webb had seen what Maria was capable of, and he knew that losing her meant losing their only chance of survival. The diversionary attack began with a concentrated burst of gunfire from the SEAL's original position. Enemy fighters immediately responded, pouring fire toward the muzzle flashes. In the confusion, Webb and his rescue team began sprinting across the 200 meters of open ground between their position and Maria's building. Inside the building, Maria heard the gunfire shift and knew her teammates were making their move. She also knew that if the enemy fighters in her building succeeded in eliminating her, they would have perfect firing positions to cut down the approaching SEALs. 3 fighters rounded the partition simultaneously, their weapons trained on where they expected her to be. But Maria had climbed onto a concrete beam near the ceiling, giving her the high ground advantage. Her rifle spoke 3 times in rapid succession, and all 3 attackers dropped before they could return fire. But the effort had revealed her position to the remaining enemies. A burst of automatic fire from below caught her in the shoulder, spinning her off the beam and sending her crashing to the floor. Pain shot through her left arm, but she could still operate her rifle. Rolling behind another piece of cover, she could hear more fighters entering the building. The enemy commander had committed additional resources to eliminating her, which meant fewer fighters defending against Webb's assault team. Her sacrifice was buying the SEALs a fighting chance. She keyed her radio with her good arm. Strike team. I'm hit but still operational. Southwest building. 2nd floor. Multiple hostiles inside. Webb's response came between bursts of gunfire. 60 seconds out. Keep them busy. Maria laughed grimly despite the pain. Keep them busy. As if she had any choice. 2 more fighters appeared at the top of the stairs, moving with the professional precision that marked them as foreign fighters rather than local Taliban. These men had trained in Pakistan or Iran, learning urban warfare techniques from military advisors. Her rifle was too long for close-quarters combat, so she transitioned to her sidearm. The M1911 pistol had been her grandfather's weapon in Korea, and she had carried it through 3 combat deployments. 7 rounds remained in the magazine. The first fighter moved to flank her position, while his partner provided covering fire. Standard room-clearing tactics. But Maria had helped write the manual on close-quarters combat, and she knew how to turn their own techniques against them. She waited until both men were committed to their movement, then rolled out from cover in the opposite direction they expected. Her first shot caught the flanking fighter center mass. Her second and third shots dropped his partner before he could react to her unexpected position. But as the second man fell, his finger contracted on his trigger. A burst of automatic fire raked across the room, and 1 round caught Maria in the leg. She went down hard, her pistol skittering across the concrete floor. Blood was flowing freely from both wounds now, and she could feel her strength beginning to ebb. Through the shattered window, she could see muzzle flashes approaching as Webb's team fought their way toward her position. But they still had 50 meters of enemy fire to cross. More boots echoed on the stairs below. The enemy was sending their final assault team to finish her. Maria dragged herself toward her pistol, leaving a trail of blood on the concrete. Her vision was starting to tunnel from blood loss, but her training kept her moving. She retrieved the weapon just as 2 more fighters appeared in the doorway. Her first shot took down the leader, but her second shot went wide as weakness affected her aim. The remaining fighter raised his AK-47 for the killing shot. The explosion that followed shook the entire building. Webb's team had reached the ground floor and was fighting their way up. Grenades detonated below as the SEALs cleared each level with ruthless efficiency. The fighter above Maria hesitated, torn between finishing her and responding to the new threat. That hesitation cost him his life, as Maria's third shot found its mark. She slumped against the wall, her ammunition exhausted and her strength nearly gone. Heavy boots pounded up the stairs, but this time they belonged to Americans. Webb appeared in the doorway, his rifle sweeping the room for targets. Behind him came Hospital Corpsman Second Class Rodriguez, the team medic, his aid bag already in his hands. "Jesus, Santos," Webb muttered as he saw the blood. Maria managed a weak smile. "Just keeping them busy, like you asked." Rodriguez was already working on her wounds, applying pressure bandages and starting an IV line. "She's lost a lot of blood, but both wounds are clean. No major arteries hit." Through the window, Maria could see the remaining enemy fighters retreating toward the mountains. The SEALs had broken their ambush, but the cost had been high. 3 Americans were dead, and 5 more were wounded. The mission to capture Hassan Malik had failed completely, but 12 men who should have died in that valley were still breathing, and that was worth more than any high-value target. As Rodriguez worked to stabilize her wounds, Maria felt the satisfaction that came from a job well done. Webb knelt beside her as his men secured the building. "Air support will be here in 10 minutes. We're going to get you out of here." Maria nodded weakly. The immediate danger was over, but she could hear vehicles starting in the distance. The enemy was regrouping, and they would be back with reinforcements. The SEALs needed to extract quickly before they found themselves trapped again. "Commander," she whispered. "This was a setup from the beginning. Someone fed us bad intelligence." Webb's face darkened as the implications hit him. If Maria was right, then someone with access to classified mission briefings had deliberately led them into an ambush. The enemy had known exactly when and where they would be coming. As the sound of helicopters grew louder in the distance, Maria closed her eyes and allowed herself a moment of rest. The immediate battle was over, but the larger war was far from finished. And now, they knew they had an enemy much closer to home than they had realized. 6 weeks later, Maria sat in a sterile debriefing room at Bagram Airfield, her left arm still in a sling from the shoulder wound. Across the metal table sat Colonel James Harrison from Army Intelligence, his face a mask of professional concern that didn't quite hide his skepticism. "Staff Sergeant Santos, your theory about compromised intelligence is serious," Harrison said, flipping through a thick folder. "But we've investigated every person with access to that mission briefing. No evidence of security breaches." Maria had expected this response. Military bureaucracy preferred simple explanations to conspiracy theories, even when soldiers died as a result. But she had spent her recovery time analyzing every detail of the ambush, and the pieces formed a pattern that couldn't be ignored. "Sir, with respect, the enemy knew our exact approach route, timing, and personnel numbers," she replied. "They had prepared positions covering every possible avenue of advance. That level of preparation requires detailed intelligence." Lieutenant Commander Webb, who had insisted on being present for the debriefing, leaned forward. "Colonel, I've run hundreds of operations in this theater. What we walked into wasn't lucky guesswork. Someone told them we were coming." Harrison's expression hardened. "Gentlemen and Sergeant, I understand you've been through trauma, but making accusations without evidence undermines unit cohesion and operational security." But Maria had evidence. During her hospital stay, she had reached out to contacts throughout the military intelligence community. Patterns emerged when she started asking the right questions. 3 other special operations missions had suffered similar ambushes over the past 6 months. All had been planned using intelligence from the same source. "Colonel, I'd like to discuss the intelligence assessment provided by Ahmed Nazir," Maria said quietly. The change in Harrison's demeanor was immediate. His relaxed posture stiffened, and his eyes narrowed. "That information is classified above your clearance level, Sergeant." Webb exchanged glances with Maria. They had found their pressure point. Ahmad Nazir was supposedly a high-level Taliban defector who had been providing intelligence to American forces for 8 months. His information had been considered gold standard, leading to numerous successful operations against insurgent leadership. "Sir, Nazir's intelligence was the primary source for our mission planning," Webb said. "If there are questions about his reliability, there are no questions about Nazir's reliability," Harrison interrupted. "His intelligence has saved American lives and disrupted enemy operations throughout the region." But Maria had done her homework during recovery. While Nazir's intelligence had indeed led to successful operations, those successes had always targeted low and mid-level enemy fighters. The high-value targets he identified either escaped before raids or were never found. Meanwhile, American special operations teams were walking into increasingly sophisticated ambushes. "Colonel, I'd like permission to review the complete file on Nazir's intelligence assessments," Maria requested. Harrison stood abruptly. "Absolutely not. This debriefing is concluded. Sergeant Santos, you're being reassigned to training duties stateside. Lieutenant Commander Webb, you'll receive new orders within 48 hours. The message was clear. Stop asking questions or face career consequences. But Maria had already made her decision during those long weeks in the hospital bed. 3 good soldiers had died because someone had betrayed their mission. She owed them more than career considerations. After Harrison left the room, Webb turned to her with concern. "Santos, be careful. You're talking about ending your military career." "Maybe," Maria replied. "But if we're right, more soldiers are going to die unless someone stops this." That evening, Maria contacted Captain Jennifer Walsh, a former teammate who now worked in the Criminal Investigation Division. Walsh had access to investigation resources that Maria lacked, and more importantly, she had the authority to pursue leads without triggering the same security restrictions that had shut down Maria's inquiries. They met at a coffee shop outside the base, away from surveillance and official reporting channels. Walsh listened as Maria laid out her suspicions, providing documentation she had quietly gathered during her recovery. "This is circumstantial," Walsh said after reviewing the evidence. "But the pattern is concerning. If Nazir is playing both sides, he's doing it very carefully." "Can you investigate without alerting Harrison's people?" Maria asked. Walsh nodded slowly. "I can run parallel inquiries through different channels. But if you're right about this, we're talking about a conspiracy that reaches high into the intelligence community. People will fight back." Over the following weeks, Walsh's investigation uncovered disturbing connections. Nazir's handler was Major David Krensky, an intelligence officer who had been taking payments to a private account in Dubai. Phone records showed regular communication with known arms dealers who supplied weapons to Taliban forces. But the conspiracy went deeper than a single corrupt officer. Krensky reported directly to Colonel Harrison, and bank records showed both men had received substantial payments from the same Middle Eastern accounts. They weren't just selling intelligence to the enemy. They were actively coordinating attacks on American forces. Walsh met Maria again 3 weeks later, this time with a federal prosecutor and an FBI agent specializing in military corruption cases. The evidence they had gathered painted a picture of systematic betrayal that had cost dozens of American lives over 8 months. "We need someone willing to testify," the prosecutor explained. "Someone with first-hand knowledge of how the corrupted intelligence was used in planning operations." Maria didn't hesitate. "I'll testify. But I want protection for my teammates. If this goes public, there will be retaliation." "Let's the Maria. Alder noun. Closing philos. Into the fore. ID about now." The FBI agent nodded. "We can arrange witness protection and new assignments for anyone who cooperates. But you should know that Harrison and Krensky have powerful allies. This won't be easy." The investigation culminated 6 months later in a military courtroom at Fort Leavenworth. Maria testified for 3 days, detailing how false intelligence had led her unit into an ambush that killed 3 soldiers and nearly wiped out an entire SEAL team. Her testimony was corroborated by communication intercepts, financial records, and statements from other soldiers who had survived similar ambushes. Harrison and Krensky were convicted on charges of treason, conspiracy, and conspiracy to commit murder. Both received life sentences in military prison. Ahmad Nazir was eliminated by a drone strike 2 weeks after the investigation became public, silencing him permanently. But the victory came at a personal cost. Maria's military career was effectively over, despite official praise for her courage in exposing the conspiracy. Too many powerful people had been embarrassed by the scandal. She was quietly encouraged to accept early retirement with full benefits. On her last day in uniform, Webb visited her quarters as she packed her belongings. He had been promoted to commander and given command of a new SEAL team, partly as compensation for the ordeal his unit had endured. "Any regrets?" he asked, watching her fold her dress uniform for the final time. Maria considered the question carefully. 3 good soldiers are still dead, but how many more would have died if we hadn't stopped Harrison and Krensky? "Dozens, probably," Webb replied. "Maybe hundreds. You saved lives, Santos. Don't forget that." Maria smiled as she closed her footlocker. "I won't. And I'll keep saving them, just in a different uniform." 6 months later, Maria began work as a civilian contractor, training military snipers at Fort Benning. Her students learned not just marksmanship and tactics, but the critical thinking skills needed to identify compromised intelligence and question orders that seemed wrong. She never spoke publicly about the ambush in Afghanistan or the investigation that followed. But every soldier she trained carried with them the lesson that sometimes the greatest courage required was not pulling the trigger, but asking the hard questions when something didn't feel right. The mountains of Afghanistan had taught her that the enemy wasn't always wearing a different uniform. Sometimes they sat across the briefing table, using the trust of good soldiers to accomplish evil goals. Her rifle had saved 12 men in that valley. Her investigation had saved countless others who would never know how close they had come to walking into similar traps. In quiet moments, Maria still thought about that desperate fight in the abandoned village. But now, she understood it differently. The real victory hadn't been the shots she made or the building she held. It had been the decision to keep fighting even after the immediate battle was over, to pursue a different kind of enemy with the same determination she had once reserved for Taliban fighters. The war in Afghanistan would eventually end, but the war against corruption and betrayal within the military would continue as long as there were soldiers willing to fight it. Maria had found her new mission, and this time, she planned to win it completely.